He just wanted to be someone who could help others, just like his great father who fought to protect that world. He thought that he was not trying to be a hero. He just wanted to be the kind of person who could protect others. A few hours ago, in Third Barrier City, Julia Curtis, who is 13 years old and a sophomore at Exorcist Academy, laid in bed. He had just woken up. He said that he was tired, but he had to wake up. He woke up, determined, and looked out of the window of his room at his city, Barrier City. 150 years ago, humanity was defeated by the demon race and driven to this region where they built Barrier City. The outside of the city is veiled in a never-ending twilight and controlled by dangerous, grotesque-looking demons. While living in the city, humans are trying to fight against the demons outside by building up and training in Exorcist Academy. They hope to regain the light in the skies cloaked by the twilight, and that was also one of Julia Curtis' goals as a student of the Academy. He looked at the photo frame of his parents and said aloud that he was heading out to his mom and dad. The door opened with a creak and shut behind him. His father was an exorcist, but died fighting demons when he was young. His mother died from an epidemic around the same time. He did not feel lonely though, because his dream was to become a great exorcist like his father. In the new scene, Julia walked over to his friends as they called him over. The boy, standing in the middle, greeted Julia and said that they were looking forward to working with him that day. Julia said that he knew. At the Exorcist Academy, classes in actual combat had begun. In other words, hunting demons outside Barrier City. It was dangerous, but without the training, he would never become a full-fledged exorcist. Julia asked them if they thought they would be okay. They were not even used to being out there, let alone hunting. His friend asked him to stop being scared. The boy standing in the corner said, just like last time, Leona and he would be the vanguard and Nola would be the rear guard. Leona said that if he supported them with healing and distracted them with his illusion magic, she was sure they would be fine. If they could hunt demons in the danger zone they were about to go to, they would get a big boost in reputation from the Academy. Julia said to keep hunting and hunting. Nola finished until they became S-ranked exorcists. An S-ranked exorcist, it was what all the students at the Academy aspired to be. Ranked higher than all the exorcists, ranked from A to E, they were even said to be humanity's hope in fighting against the twilight. Julia thought that an E rank like himself had never met one before. His friend said that they would be the ones reporting back to the Academy after returning. Nola continued that Julia did not really have anything to do. Julia hesitated and said that he was helping. Nola asked Julia if he did not mind. Because their skills did not even compare, he asked him to think about his position before saying anything. Julia thought over it and said okay. The boy at the side asked Dan if they were already in the danger zone. He replied that he was not sure. Julia asked everyone to look. There were 2 claw lizards behind the bushes. Dan smirked and pulled out his sword. He said it was not too bad. Julia said to hunt them down. They all attacked the claw lizards and slashed at them. Dan said that they could do that. He was saying something but stopped midway. An army of claw lizards had appeared. Julia asked Dan if, or not quite a lot. Dan replied that he got it. He cursed and asked Julia to lead them away, and then they would strike from behind. Julia tried to object, but Dan intervened. He asked him to just do that or else they all were dead. Julia murmured okay as sweat dripped down his forehead. Julia closed his eyes and prayed to maximize his physical enhancement. While Julia prayed, Dan, Leona, and their friend dashed away from there to safety. Julia pulled out his sword and slashed at the claw lizards. He used illusion magic and continued to fight. He shouted to escape and leave right away. While he was desperately swinging his sword, Dan's conversation did not reach his ears. He panted and continued to fight. In the end, Dan and the others ran off without a fight and never came back. Julia thought it was their plan to leave him behind and escape. That was what they probably said back then. Betrayed and used as bait. Honestly, he had a feeling that would happen someday. But when it actually happened, he felt so shocked. An inexplicable emptiness and sadness filled his chest. Julia said that he should go back, and he could not take it anymore. In the new scene, Julia touched a barrier around him. It was a magic barrier. He sensed Leona's magic, so they trapped him inside with the horde of claw lizards. That was a lot of thought they put into that. He could not even go back then. He did not even know how many days had passed since then. It no longer seemed possible to return to the city. The only thing on Julia's mind was that he did not want to die. The outside world, the twilight, was harmful to the body. Julia thought of the possibility of what was going to happen if he stayed out there for longer. Julia stumbled upon something and he fell. He tried to grab at something, but all his hands grabbed at were injured claw lizards. He laid flat on the ground, questioning how it came to that. Julia said that he saw their faces and he started to feel a dark emotion, but even that was a bit fuzzy then. He wanted to survive. He did not want to die. After some time, Julia regained consciousness. He got up and pulled his sleeves up. He noticed there were scars on his skin, and they were spreading up his arm. Julia was surprised and scared at the same time. Was the magic from the twilight corroding him? Julia thought. He had never seen anything like that. He thought the twilight harmed the body, but how was it possible? Who knew what was going to happen? Even high-ranked exorcists did not stay out there for long periods of time. He was probably the only human being who had been in the twilight for that long. Anything could happen then. If that killed him, it was over. Suddenly, a claw lizard appeared out of nowhere. A claw lizard boss. He thought he was going to be eaten by that thing. The claw lizard boss thought he was feeling kinda hungry. It had been long since he last ate. Death. Julia thought that he was going to die without achieving anything and without being able to do anything. Julia stood up determined. He wanted to be someone who could help others, not a pawn to be used by others. He stood up in front of the boss and said that he was not going to die there. He thought he needed to defeat that demon. For that, he needed a weapon. He asked if he could make it with his illusions. The demon asked him to not make him laugh after all, it was just an illusion. Julia stopped and waited for a moment. At that moment, his body was already on the move. Illusion magic could only be used for distractions, but for some reason, he felt like he could do a bit more with it. A sword made from an illusion. It was useless as it was. Illusions disappeared. Julia thought then what he should do. That was right. He should fix this illusion in this world. He used his illusion to create a weapon and used his sword to fight the old boss. That was the beginning of a new life with a new him. His stomach grumbled and Julia guessed he was hungry. 1 year later, Julia munched on the raw meat of a claw of lizards. He was still stuck in the twilight. He traveled and traveled, but Barrier City was nowhere to be seen. He survived by killing and eating demons. He was starting to understand a little more about how the twilight worked. The demons living in the twilight had auras around them that represented their strength. But the illusory sword he had first activated that day, for some reason that sword absorbed that aura and turned it into his own power. It was most likely because the sword was connected to the mark on his right arm, but he was not sure. In any case, in the mysterious twilight world, only the strongest survived. You had to use everything you had to survive. Julia just wanted to go back. It did not have to be his hometown, Third Barrier City. It could be the first or wherever. He could not find anything, or it might be he was just dumb. Julia wandered into the trap he was held. He was amazed to finally find houses, a sign of human life. Julia was betrayed, left to die, and survived in the twilight for a whole year. And just when he thought he wanted to go back home, he saw a sign of livelihood. He had encountered several demi-human species like goblins along the way, but this was completely different from those nests. It was so pretty. But what was it with the size? An old man appeared in front of him and presumed a guest. Julia said that he was huge, but they were cloud giants. He thought they learned about them in the academy. Cloud giants were just as intelligent as humans, although they boasted incredible strength. They were not a belligerent species and rarely aggressive towards humans. The man said that he did set up a magic barrier against outsiders. He guessed it was not operating. He asked Julia who he was. Julia thought about what he should do. He concluded that he should answer honestly. Julia replied his name was Julia, and he was human. The man asked, "How are you?" He looked at Julia's right arm. He questioned a twilight human. Julia thought, twilight human. That was the first time he had heard of it. Did cloud giants know anything about his arm? Julia pondered. Julia looked at the man and praised. He looked much stronger than the others. He wondered if he was the leader. The man asked if Julia said his name was that. He said that his name was Edgar. He was the chief of that village. He asked Julia to come with him. He said to let him welcome him. Julia thought if it was for real. Julia thought that cloud giants were from demon kin. He wondered why they seemed used to humans. He did not detect any hostility. He could not really turn down his invitation. He had to follow him for then. They sat inside a house. The man said that he understood his situation then. Edgar said that he had been wandering around for a year since he left the city. That was definitely not a trivial matter for humans. Julia asked Edgar if he knew of the Barrier City's existence. Edgar replied in affirmative that their relations with humans were quite neutral, so they knew that much. He said that if he recalled correctly, a human appeared there about 3 years ago. He had red markings on his arm. just like Julia's. This got Julia's attention all the more. Julia asked him if he knew anything about those red markings. Edgar replied that they were proof that he was a Twilight human. They were proof a human had adapted to the Twilight. Julia questioned, "A Twilight human?" Edgar nodded and said, "The Twilight was poisonous for humans. However, there were those who could adapt to it. They were called the Twilight people. Those who live in the Twilight had an ability called Twilight Field. Twilight people were the only ones who could truly resist the Twilight Field, or so they said." Julia guessed that was the secret of his invisible sword. Julia said that he understood. He asked further about the man who came there 3 years ago. Edgar said that he stayed with them for a brief period of time, but he did leave several books there. Julia asked for books. He replied yes. He commended, however, he saw that he had adapted quite well. Julia looked at him blankly. Edgar said that his adaptation to the Twilight was just like the person who visited him before, even better. Julia squirmed and asked what Twilight was in the first place. He said that he knew it appeared 150 years ago, during the Great Human-Demon War, but all he knew came from the old tales. Edgar said that they were the same as him. They did not know. Julia asked what exactly Twilight was. Its cause and origin were all a mystery. Edgar asked Julia if he did not want to return to the barrier cities. Julia replied he did want to, but like he said, he had no idea where he was. All he had done was wander around. Edgar said he had a map. Julia looked at him in belief. Edgar said that he could give it to him if he would like. Julia questioned seriously. Edgar asked, would he have a bout with him? They were species that lived by the sword. He also had a fight with that man who came there 3 years ago. However, he ended up losing. A one-on-one match. Edgar asked him to use their martial arts to the best of their abilities and fight. He said if he accepted, he would give him the map and the books that he previously mentioned, as well as supplies, whatever was necessary for his travels. Edgar asked him what he thought. Julia thought that that was so sudden for him. He had not felt any hostility since he met him. He guessed he could trust him, but he also had his doubts. He said that he understood. He thought that he wanted to try out his new powers. He said that he happily accepted his offer. They both got into a battleground with their swords. Edgar asked him to remember that that was not a death match. He had dulled his blade. Julia said he understood and he would do the same then. Edgar nodded and asked him to allow him to start then. Edgar attacked him. Julia thought. A straight line attack with his sword and with extraordinary power at that. However, that was still easy to avoid. Julia fought back. Edgar's blade changed its trajectory at an impossible angle. It must be inertia control magic, Julia thought. He could not believe cloud giants could use it as well. Edgar nodded. Edgar said that that guy was materializing his illusion magic into a sword and to an amazing degree of completion at that. As one would expect from a Twilight human, he thought that he had no choice but to go all out. They both latched at each other. Julia thought that he would be at a disadvantage if they dragged that out. He thought, to finish that quickly he would have to, but before he could think further, he slipped. Julia cursed as he fell. Edgar stood over him and said he was his. Edgar thought he had won, but Julia rendered him surprised. Julia got up suddenly, using a trick to lure his opponent into being careless. Success. Edgar closed his eyes and commented that that was splendid. It was his loss. Julia said no, it was his loss. He said that he went all out halfway through the bout, but he did not use all of his strength at all. Edgar said he wondered. He continued, either way he was the one who ended up winning the bout. Thus he would give him what he promised so that he might depart. Julia asked him if he might stay there for a little longer. He said that he was thinking it might be better for him to train before he left. For a whole year he had slept outside. He had kept wondering if he fell asleep would he ever wake up again. Julia said that his survival of the fittest mentality was ingrained into him. So in order for him to get back home safely, he wanted to get as strong as possible before he left. Edgar laughed and said to him, bravo. He said that if that was what he wanted, he would help him out as much as possible. Julia thanked him gratefully. It was time for Julia to leave. Julia thanked them for everything. Edgar wished him to take care on the way. Julia thanked again. Julia thought that he was indebted to them after staying at Cloud Giant Village for 6 months. But thanks to them, he had become stronger. Julia looked at the book that Edgar gave to him. He knew it was written about the Twilight world and demons, but that was too complicated for him to understand. Julia said he might get someone to look at it when he got back to the city. He did not know where it would belong if he went back then, but it beat the wandering around there forever. He thought of going home then. Even after 6 months, he was not there yet. Julia said that he had been looking for almost a year since he left from the village of the Cloud Giants, so he could not help but think it was about time he arrived. He said that the worst was he had not come across any edible monsters in the last few days. He was so hungry. On his way, helmet jellyfish. It was a monster. Crow lizards were delicious. Julia got upset as he realized he had reached his limit. Julia's eyes widened as he saw a city wall in some far view. He could not believe it. He had reached Barrier City. He ran in the direction of the wall, crying and shouting that he was home. He was relieved to be back home finally. He stepped on mud and tripped over. He lost consciousness. A girl saw him and appeared where he was. Next time Julia opened his eyes, he was in a room. Two ladies stood at his side. One with a blazer asked him if he was awake. She said to him that it was nice to meet her. She said that she was Elsa Ames. She asked him what his name was. Julia said that his name was Uriah Curtis. He asked them if that was the Barrier City. Elsa replied in affirmation. She told him that that was the 7th Barrier City. Julia asked them 7th. He was surprised to find that. It was great that he was back in Barrier City, he thought, but 7th, he must have drifted a bit. It was fine though. Elsa Ames told Uriah Kun that an Exorcist training found him unconscious outside, and the clothing he was wearing was the uniform of 3rd Barrier City. They told him that his clothes were badly soiled, so they were being laundered right then. She told him that she saw his name on the missing persons list, but there was something that did not add up. They asked him what he had been doing for the past 2 years. Julia thought that they were wary of him. He was not sure if they would trust him, but he thought he should be honest with them. Julia said that he was hungry and he was reaching his limit. He asked them if they could get him something to eat. Elsa asked Sherry to bring him some clothes. Sherry replied yes. They gave Julia some tea and a hot dog and he delved into the bites. He moaned and said it was good. Elsa said now that he had eaten. She said to him that she heard he had been wandering around in the twilight for 2 years. Julia said that that was true. She said to him that that was hard to believe, but it was not completely absurd, including the bruises. She asked him what he was going to do then. Would he rather return to the 3rd Barrier City, and what about the Academy? Julia replied that his dream was to become an Exorcist master, but there was no place for him back home. They offered him to transfer there and become an Exorcist master of the 7th Barrier City. Elsa told him that she was late in introducing herself, but she was headmaster of the Academy, and she would be happy to help him transfer there if he liked. Julia asked her if it could really happen. He would love to. The girl beside her objected. Apparently, she was the daughter of the headmaster. She said that he was lying, and with shaggy hair like that he was definitely a weirdo. She said that she did not believe that a frail, skinny-looking girl had somehow been in Twilight for 2 whole years. She said that she absolutely did not trust him. Elsa said that she would like him to meet her daughter, Sherry Amos, and the one who found him. Elsa said to Sherry that she heard Uriah Kun was in trouble. She said that since he was originally an Exorcist Academy student, there should not be any problem accepting him there. Julia and Sherry agreed. Sherry told Julia to fight one-on-one, and if he won, he could transfer there, but if he lost, he should go straight back to his city. Sherry asked her mom, how about that? Elsa sighed and said that she would allow it if it was just a mock battle. Julia thought, what about Uriah Kun? He thought, no way, not again. The same thing happened to him a year ago. He did not know why he was suddenly being asked to fight a duel. The Cloud Giant fight felt like it was a month ago to him. Julia thought about what people of the 3rd Barrier City had done to him, and he realized he really did not want to go there anymore. He said that he would do it. He thought it would be better if he just went to a new place. He thanked them. They got on a battleground. Sherry said that this one-on-one match was only a mock battle to win. He must strike a decisive blow. She continued he was free to use magic, but if she deemed it dangerous, he must stop immediately. She asked him if he understood. He said yes. Julia swung his sword when Sherry told him that she did not tell him that she was an A-rank exorcist. Julia asked if she was serious. He said that that was amazing. She asked him if he was 15 years old. He said yes. She said that he was the same age as her. She asked him if he knew what A-rank meant. Elsa asked to start the battle. Sherry said that it meant he would never win. As they fought, in one move, Julia rendered her moveless. He thought that he could read her movements, so he quickly closed the gap between them. He did not even need to use the invisible blade to show he was stronger than her. Sherry was embarrassed. She looked at him and asked to fight one more time. Julia asked, rematch? He said okay unwillingly. He won the match again. They fought over 10 times and she lost them all consecutively. She said that it was her loss. She gave up. She said that she had said something stupid earlier and she was really sorry. She said that he was really strong. Julia said that he was not really, but he got cut midway. Elsa said that it was settled then. She welcomed him to the 7th Barrier City Exorcist Academy. She said that she was officially registering him as an A-rank exorcist. He asked, "What A rank?" Elsa said that he beat Sherry, who was ranked A, so an A rank would be a reasonable start. Julia thought that it was too absurd. Elsa said to him that she would send him the transfer form later, but in the meantime, was there anything he needed or wanted? Julia said he needed a haircut. In the new scene, Julia had gotten a new school, new uniform, new haircut, and his new life had begun. Julia told someone that he had transferred from the 3rd Barrier City and his name was Julia Curtis. He said to his classmates that it was nice to meet them all. One classmate of his said that she had a question. She asked him if it was true that Julia Kun spent 2 years in the Twilight area. Julia laughed it off and said it was not true. He just moved there due to some circumstances. Someone else asked him about the rumor that he beat Sherry in a sword duel. They asked if that rumor was true. He said that that was not true either. He said that Shelly San and he did not have a fight. They just ran to each other while he was filling out his registration form. The girl said that in the end, the rumors were rumors. Another boy said that he had a question for him too. He asked Julia what exorcist rank he was. Julia said that currently, it was A rank. They asked him if it was for real. They said, as expected, that he beat Sherry. They all were surprised to know that he was A rank. He said it just merely happened that way. It was not that big a deal. He said that the reason for that was, but he got saved by a girl. She stared at the students and Julia left with her. She said that they must have bombarded him with questions since day one. Julia laughed off. She said that it was not every day they got a new student, and to some extent, he was better off just dodging those rumors. He said yes. She said to him that as he was already aware, she asked him to keep the pattern in his right arm a secret for then. It would create unnecessary confusion. Julia said that he understood. The new scene was from before admission. Julia had to undergo a physical examination. The examiner told him that usually new students had only a standard physical exam, but in his case, because of his right arm, they needed to run some tests on him. Julia said that that was natural, and he would also like to know what was going on with his body. She said to him to get one thing straight. She continued that they believed they had found a new disease in him, a disease they called Twilight Syndrome. She said that it was also at the 5th stage, and there are no further stages than that. Twilight Syndrome was announced at an academic scientific study conference about a year and a half ago. She told him that as he knew Twilight was harmful to humans, that had been proven using data staged on how far it developed. In any case, when normal people reach the 5th stage of Twilight Syndrome, they lose consciousness and slowly die. She said that she supposed it did not apply to him since he had spent the previous 2 years in that condition. She said, furthermore in the story, he told her the other day about the Cloud Giants. He mentioned the Twilight area. She said that they had been working on that as well. It was the first time she had heard the word Twilight Human. There, they called it something different. It was equal to an S-rank exorcist. Elsa said that S-rank exorcists could survive in the Twilight area, and A ranks could perhaps as well though, but only a few of them. She said that she did not know what the people in Cloud Giant's village told him, but either way in essence they could assume he was just as capable as an S-ranked exorcist. She said to him that he was a very valuable being. Julia wondered what the hell kind of person he was becoming. He was at a loss for words. He thought besides they were doing research on the symptoms, which was better than being a complete mystery. She said to him that the students' dorms were full. As for where he would be sleeping, there was a vacant dormitory cabin for lecturers, so he would have to sleep there for a while. He could use the shower whenever he wanted. It was like heaven compared to out there. Elsa said to him that she was counting on him. She asked him to take care of Sherry for her too. He said okay and that he would see her later. Sherry stared at Julia from behind a wall. She flipped and ran to him. She asked him to come with her for a second. She served him 2 pieces of sandwiches. He asked her what that was. She said it was for him. She said he probably did not pack his lunch anyway and he did not have anyone to share it with. She asked him unsure if she was right. He said, "Thank you," and started to sob. He grabbed the sandwiches and started to eat. Sherry asked if it was fine if she asked him something about Twilight. Julia said sure. She asked him how he survived there and what he ate. He replied, food, usually monsters. Then there were the frogs, snakes, and spiders, which were surprisingly delicious. He continued, at first it was tough, but he got used to it. Still, though, the finest delicacy was the simple food like that. She commented she guessed that it was true if you were so strong. The only thing you had to worry about was food. Julia said it was only after he went to Twilight that he became strong. She looked at him and said that he was kidding. Julia said that it was true. Before that, he was an Exorcist. He was a failure, the lowest ranked in his class. Sherry asked him how he ended up in Twilight then. Julia grew silent. He said if she knew, at the academy in their curriculum, they had to form parties to hunt in safe zones. Sherry nodded and muttered yes. He continued, so one time their leader went to the danger zone. They encountered a lot of monsters, so they used him as bait. He said they trapped him inside a magic barrier in order to lure the monsters to him. He said that the barrier disappeared after a night or a few days, but back then he couldn't bear staying in such a place for even one night, so he had no choice but to start walking around. After that he got lost and so was unable to return home. Sherry commented that that sort of thing was just too much. She said even though they could have used a barrier in another way or something. Julia frankly thought rather than using a barrier to get them all back alive, it was better and safer to use him as bait to escape. Sherry asked if he wasn't frustrated. Julia replied, not really. He said that he was walking through that vast, dreadful twilight, so he had stopped thinking about them. He was too desperate to survive. She said that she understood how he ended up so strong. Julia chortled and said that her mindset was completely different from his. She said, not really. She said she was not used to asking people for favors like that. She shied to ask. She asked him if he could train her, please. Julia looked at her questioningly. She continued because she wanted to be strong too. Julia said sure she was okay with him. She looked at him with bright eyes and asked, really? She said that she was glad. She added she had been trying to ask him all day. Julia said, whenever she was ready. Julia thought, just a few minutes ago, he never thought he would ever be able to make her smile like that. Sherry thanked him and requested him to take care of her. Julia could not believe a girl's smile could be so dazzling. He was so happy. He wanted to cherish it, that new life of his. A few days later, Julia had been going back home. He said it had gotten late. He had been training with Sherry and studying for the class. He pondered what he should eat for dinner. It turned dark, and as he walked deeper into the forest, he felt a swoosh of air behind him. He searched around him. That feeling, bloodlust, he thought. Was a monster inside the city? Julia said no, it was human bloodlust, but that was not a normal human. That felt familiar, like Twilight to him. A man appeared behind Julia and said he thought about testing him with a surprise attack, but it was just not his style. He said to Julia that he would take him head on. Julia asked the guy who he was. He said to Julia that if he would still be alive in a few seconds, he would tell him. They both fought with each other with their swords. The guy said to Julia that he was good at that. Julia thought that that guy was dangerous. He asked him to let him play with him a little longer. The guy attacked him and Julia thought that he was too strong. Before they could fight further, a girl whistled and appeared in the view. She said to the guy that that was enough. She scolded the guy named Gil. She asked him if he did not say in the meeting that it should be a surprise attack. Jill smiled evilly and said, "His bad." He said he just wanted to test Julia head to head. He guessed he passed. Julia looked at them and asked who they were. Jill apologized for being so abrupt. He introduced himself as Gil and the girl said her name was Claudia. Julia said that those seemed familiar. He was not as well known as him though. Jill said that they both were S-ranked exorcists. Julia looked at them in disbelief. Jill said that they would take him to meet the #1 S-ranked exorcist, Cyrus. Julia panicked and asked them to wait for a moment. He said that that was too sudden and it was all happening so fast. Gil asked, "Too sudden?" Claudia apologized to him and said that the old guy had a screw loose. Julia asked, "What?" Claudia said that she would explain everything. Claudia said that she was sorry, but they had been keeping a close eye on him since they arrived. She said that they even got a sneak glimpse of his sword fight against Sherry Ames. She said that after that day, the S-ranked exorcists came to a decision. She said that she would like to talk to him about Cyrus. Julia thought that it was just too sudden, as usual. He thought that he understood why. Surely given his circumstances, they would at least keep an eye on him. But still S-ranked exorcist Cyrus, he was the first amongst the 12 S-ranked exorcists. His name was well known, but only a few people had seen his face. He was the hero of Twilight. He was the strongest human alive. Julia pondered what in the world someone like him would want from him. They all walked to a house when Claudia announced that they were there. Julia thought in the end he had followed them. Jill and Claudia bid him bye, saying they would see him later. Julia asked them if it was just him. He looked at them in disbelief. Someone opened the door and called Julia. He came inside. The lad told her that she was glad that he came. Julia said his apologies, he seemed to have kept him waiting. The lad said no worries. He asked him to sit down and he would make him a cup of tea. Julia asked him to excuse him, but asked where Cyrus-san was. The boy smiled and said that he was Cyrus. She said it was nice to meet him. Julia questioned, he was Cyrus? Cyrus asked him if he was surprised. He said yes. He continued, he meant that may be rude, but he was expecting someone who looked a little more fierce. Cyrus said that he got that a lot. It was what the others often said. He said he needed to look a little more fierce or something. Julia wondered if he was really Cyrus. He seemed too normal. Cyrus said that he added a lot of sugar. For Julia, it was a little hard to believe. Cyrus forwarded his hand and said he was Cyrus, first rank of the S-ranked Exorcists. He said it was nice to meet him. They both shook their hands. Julia said it was nice to meet him too. Julia felt a course of electricity and shock through him. Julia stuttered. He thought what the hell was with his magic power. Julia thought of the terrifying force that emanated from the palm of his hand. Cyrus thought no hostility at all. That was why he could feel it so strongly. He found no doubt about Julia. Cyrus said he was sorry if he scared him, but he believed that proved he was not lying. Cyrus asked to get down to business. He said that he would get straight to the point. He said to Julia that he wanted him to become a S-ranked exorcist. Cyrus said that he had judged that he was powerful enough to become one. Julia frowned, unhappy with the situation. Cyrus asked if he was against the idea. Julia said it was not that. It was just that there had been too many unexpected developments. He said that his mind could not keep up. He was spinning out of control. Cyrus laughed and said that it was not easy for him either. He said he was sure he was already aware that he was quite the unusual one. So they could not just lead him to his own devices. One of the reasons there was that he was trying to build a relationship with him as well. Julia looked at him blankly. Julia thought that in other words, if by some chance he became an enemy of mankind, he wanted to persuade him to join him before that happened, be that as it might be. Julia thought that it was true he had a dream of becoming a top-ranked exorcist, but that it was happening then. He thought of his dreams. He felt like he had been using them to just escape from reality. He said he was not sure he could currently do that. Julia asked Cyrus to say where it was then. Cyrus took a sip from his cup. He said, regardless of whatever he chose, it was best for him to stay with other S-rank exorcists. He pulled up his sleeve and said, because most of them were just like him. Julia looked at the red marks and thought of Twilight Syndrome. He said that most S-ranked exorcists were afflicted with that Twilight Syndrome. The mark appeared in different places on different people. There was a lot of research being done on how to treat it, so he was sure there was more to learn. Cyrus continued there was something else going on. He said, in fact, the royal family was currently visiting each city. Cyrus explained that the 7th barrier city was their last stop, but they needed a few more guards to return to the first barrier city. They were selecting a few talented students at that time in order to train the next generation. Cyrus said that they were going to recommend Julia. He asked him what he thought of it. Cyrus said humanity had not moved forward since they lost the human-demon war. Trying to maintain the status quo to relieve them had gradually set them back. He said that he thought it was time for them to move forward. He said it was the time to regain the light of the world then. Julia said, indeed it was. In that case, maybe that was what his father was looking for, and that is exactly what he was lacking. Julia said that he understood, and still he was not entirely sure he was ready for that. S-rank exorcist, he could handle that. Julia said to Cyrus that in his view, he needed at least one strong companion, and for that he was willing to trust him. Cyrus thanked him. Julia said, welcome. Julia recalled his conversation with Cyrus, how he recognized him as an S-rank exorcist, and invited him to join them, which he had accepted. Now that he was back in his room to calm down and think about it, he realized what a reckless decision it was. He was an S-rank exorcist now. Sherry called Julia's name and came inside the room. She gave him the book and said, the book he asked about the other day. Julia sighed gladly and thanked her. Julia thought about something else for a while then. Julia picked a book and Sherry asked him if he was going to read all that and summarize it in his notebook. Julia said yes. She asked him if he was supposed to submit a report after he was finished. He replied no. Julia said that he was 2 years behind everyone else and he needed to get back on track with his studies. He said that aside from that, he would like to learn as much information as possible to increase his chances of survival. Sherry looked at him and told him that when he was done with that, they would start special training again. She confirmed it with him. Julia nodded and said yes. Their classmates looked at them in awe and asked Sherry if she and Julia were going on an after-school date that day. Sherry glared at them and said it was not like that. It was only combat training. The girl asked the guy named Keith if they also wished they could join them. Keith huffed and taunted. That was not going to make her stronger. Sherry asked Sophia and Keith if they would be A rank soon too. Sophia said that she already passed. Keith said that they would be officially notified later. Sherry asked them if they heard about the rumor that they were going to pick some students from this school to escort the royal family. Julia said that it was not a rumor, it was a fact. Keith said that he would definitely be chosen. Sophia said she hoped she did not get to tour other cities that often. Julia said that they were not there to sightsee in any case, since they were just going to be escorts. They might as well enjoy it. It was evening now. Sherry and Julia got into the battleground where Julia taught her. He asked her to focus on her breathing. He asked her to put all her strength right into the moment of the strike. Sherry put all of her strength but ended up losing. Julia said that she still had a long way to go, but she was using body enhancement and inertial control with precision. He praised Sherry. That was amazing. She said to him that he was the one who was amazing. She said he was a real force to be reckoned with. The more she practiced with him, the more she realized it. She could tell right away the difference in their skill. Julia said, even so, for her to understand the strength of her enemies, surely that meant she was getting stronger. It was like they said, knowing your opponent's strength was part of being strong. Sherry thanked him. Julia said that they should head back then. He thought it was gonna rain. Sherry said, okay. Sherry looked at Julia and asked him if she could use the bathtub in his room that day. Julia stopped midway. Sherry blushed and explained that the baths in the girls' dormitory were being repaired right then. It would be fixed by the next day, so everyone was just putting up with it for that day. She said that it was kind of impossible for her, she was sweating too much.